Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. How are you? How are things going? I know you can't answer me back, but I just want you to know I am thinking about you, curious about how you're doing, and grateful that you're here listening to this episode. It's an episode I've wanted to do for a long time because it's a sensitive topic. It's one that people can either get real defensive around, scared about, which is all understandable. So let's hold lots of compassion for this conversation because Amanda and I talked about her journey of sobriety, what it was like for her, why did she get sober, what's the roots of it, and how to really stay sober. And so this isn't about convincing you to sobriety. It's about getting or accessing rather curiosity around it. So let me introduce you to my guest. Amanda Kuda is an alcohol-free lifestyle expert. She's a holistic life coach, speaker, author, living, working, and playing in Austin, Texas. As a coach, Amanda helps ambitious, soul-centered women stop drinking and start manifesting the life they desire and deserve. She teaches a modern approach to personal development, self-actualization, and spiritual enlightenment through the lens of elective sobriety. Amanda's first book, Unbottled Potential, Break Up with Alcohol and Break Through to the Best Life, is now out and sold wherever you can buy books. Her work has been featured on CNN, Business Insider, and The Skim. Amanda and I met through Michelle Fredson doing our book proposals. As you can see, Amanda, well, she was already pretty far into her book proposal, has already gotten her book out into the world. And I haven't even finished my book proposal, which is okay. Holding all the compassion, life gets busy. There's been grief. There's been lots of things happen in between now and when I met Amanda. So I'm so excited to have her on the podcast. I've wanted to have her on for some time. We're both authentic in this conversation. I think real about all of the myths around alcoholism and just the whole sober curiosity movement that's going on. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I do. If you do, I would love a review. You don't have to, but I would love a review if you would like, or to pass it along, more importantly, to somebody that you think you want to start a conversation about being curiously sober with. And that's all this really, I hope, sparks, is to have more conversation around this topic. So share it. Post it on social, whatever you'd like. I would be so grateful because I want to help change this conversation and help people along their healing and growth journey. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Amanda. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. This is a topic that I've wanted to cover. I cannot even tell you for how long. It's just finding the right expert, the right guest to come on the show and talk about this topic. It's one that can feel overwhelming. It can feel invigorating at the same time, but scary. So I want to make sure we're holding all the tender compassion as we talk about the topic of sobriety. And without further ado, I want to welcome Amanda to the podcast.
Thank you, Kristen. I love the term that just being tender and compassionate with people about this topic because it is a big thing with a lot of confusion and stigma around it.
It is. And I feel like people tip their toe in the water and they like, I want to do it. And yet I'm scared about my social life, my relationships, how that will change, how I'll handle it. And then we've normalized drinking for so long that to even the thought of giving it up feels like too big, too overwhelming. So tell me how you even started on the journey of sobriety.
Yes. Well, it was an interesting thing that I didn't ever really think about as a possibility because I identified as a casual or social drinker. So I want to also put that out there right at the front, just in case someone hears the word sobriety and they're like, oh, that's not for me. I don't qualify as someone who, quote, has a problem. And I really want to open up the conversation to be a little bit more or a little less new or a little more nuanced, I guess, than the traditional conversation that we've had, which is you only need to quit drinking if you've hit rock bottom, if you are addicted to alcohol, if you're having these symptoms in your life or physically. And that's not true. And back about 10 years ago, I was in the midst of what I can only say is a combination of an existential crisis or a spiritual awakening. I didn't know quite at the time what was happening, but I knew that my life felt like it was just okay. It felt like kind of one of those feelings where I'm sure a lot of your clients relate, where I was just kind of thinking, is this all there is? I felt like everything that I was doing was really monotonous, mundane, very repetitive. And yet there was nothing wrong with my life. I was checking all of the boxes of what it meant to live a quote unquote good, successful life. And I was also drinking pretty heavily on the weekends with my social crew. And at this time, this was not abnormal for the phase of life I was in. I was in my mid 20s. I had a great career and I was out kind of with the CNBC and young social people. And so this work hard, play hard mentality was very normalized. And for some of your clients, it might look more like a work hard, wind down at the end of the day mentality. I was more of a really hit it hard on the weekends, weekend warrior type. But I had what was presented as a very normalized relationship with alcohol. And as I stepped into this little existential crisis I was having, I actually don't think it was little, but we'll make it sound cute and more fun and inviting. I started to wonder what I was doing wrong. I felt like no matter what I did, that everything felt like an uphill struggle, that I was going to therapy. I had started integrating these spiritual practices. I was doing yoga and I was working on meditation. I was journaling. If you could have suggested a pop culture solution to my problems, I was going to try it. And yet nothing seemed to be working. And what I couldn't wrap my head around was the possibility that maybe it wasn't so much about adding positive things to my life during the week, but what I maybe was doing on the weekend to negate all of those positive activities, which was my social life, my going out and drinking. And I finally came to a point right after I turned 30, which by the way is a pretty early age to realize this. I think I was a little ahead of the curve here. So if you are coming to this at a different time frame, it's all divine and everything happens perfectly when it's supposed to for you in your life. But I finally realized that maybe it's not so much about adding all of these great practices in. What if I need to remove something from my life? And the answer kept being alcohol, alcohol, alcohol. And I kept saying, no, 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 that can't be it because I really identified as this person who came alive and was the life of the party. And that was how I cured all of my social anxieties. That if we were to go back in my psychological history, we could talk about all of the reasons I started drinking in the first place. And I became really fearful of what my life would look like without alcohol in the picture. And so I put off that kind of internal knowing I had had for about 2 years and tried to dabble with moderation, tried to cut back before eventually just deciding, no, this is something I really have to put some intention into. And long story short, we can dive into different aspects of it. I decided in January 2017 to do dry January, and I haven't drank since. And that was certainly not the intention, but that is the result. And I've since become a pretty prominent voice in the alcohol free or elective sobriety space and have written a book. And now I'm a coach in this space. And I think it's really important work that I kind of accidentally fell into because of my own need and my own curiosity.
Yeah, I think you've just summarized so many people's experience because you kind of alluded to the reasons you started drinking. A little bit of social anxiety. Can you share more of what started the alcohol? How would you frame that about your relationship with alcohol? Like, how did that begin?
Yes, I think that origin story is really important and something that I really delve into with my clients because the reality is that story began for me way before I started drinking because there were always opportunities to observe alcohol in my youth. And so there was the way that my uncles gathered around the grill having a beer. There was the way my mom would have a wine cooler after mowing the lawn. And fortunately and unfortunately for me, my father at one point was married to this wonderful woman who was a textbook alcoholic, incredibly intelligent and just was powerless over alcohol. So I also saw firsthand the grips that alcohol could have on someone. And I remember being in my mid teens and seeing everyone kind of start to dwindle from sleepovers to this like basement party, garage party, field party. I'm from the Midwest. So places we partied were maybe very unique to us, but started to kind of drift into this other area. And I desperately wanted to fit in. I did not naturally. I wasn't the most beautiful, popular girl. I was kind of a theater nerd and always really wanted to fit in. And so I started to grapple with this kind of decision of, I think that alcohol is kind of lowbrow. It looks like what the snotty kids are doing. And by the way, I've seen someone be really, really horrifically affected by it. But then this other piece of me that reasoned, well, it's kind of what I need to do as my social rite of passage. And as long as I don't get as bad as my stepmom was, I should be okay. And so I went into it with this reasoning of this is what I need to do to be cool and good. And as long as I monitor it, as long as I never let it get that bad, I should be fine. And so that's kind of how I operated with alcohol. I used it as this social lubricant to help me come out of my shell and be this more magnanimous personality that was hiding inside of me, but I didn't really feel that I had the social cachet to exude on the regular. And I used it to make myself feel comfortable going into social situations where I felt like everyone was maybe a little bit cooler than me and to come out of my shell in those situations. And that carried over into college and then my young adult life. And so I don't think that that's anything really exceptional. But when I look back at it, I also just have a lot of tenderness for that scared little teenage girl who just wanted to fit in. And the reality that then I spent another decade of my life trying to fit in is also something that I just have so much self compassion for and the compassion for anyone listening who resonates with that.
I agree. How important is it for you when you're working with people to go back and look at their family of origin, the history, the timeline of when it started, how it progressed? How important is that?
For me, it's really important. And to be clear, I'm not a clinician or a therapist, but I do have a lot of background in communications and ways that we form ideas in mindsets. And one of the things that's so interesting is you have to be aware that your mindset about alcohol goes back before you actually had a physical interaction with it. Especially, I work with high achievers. I work with people who are incredibly capable, who on a self and spiritual development journey. So sometimes it can be really frustrating for them to rationalize, well, I don't have a problem. I know I'm not physically addicted. So why can't I seem to kick this with ease? And if we look at the fact that your relationship, the thoughts you have about alcohol go back to before you started drinking, it helps it make sense a little bit more. So, what did you start to believe about alcohol? So, for me, it was it's a source of camaraderie, it's a source of relaxation. I had all of these little beliefs that were tucked away in my file cabinet that I wasn't consciously understanding were affecting me in my relationship with alcohol. So if I can help someone become aware, what are these beliefs that you've been holding on to in the back of your little mind since way before you started drinking? It helps them understand a little bit and have some more self-compassion as to why is it so difficult for me to kick this habit?
Yeah, I think that's so important. I also think this idea that we have around normalization of alcohol, like it's not that big of a deal. Like you said, the messages we got in childhood, but a lot of people think, well, I am not, they think of as typical drunk. I hate saying that, but where you're
Yeah.
drunk all day
hmm
and you're not able to function well, that's what they think is an alcoholic. How would you define an unhealthy relationship with alcohol?
Yes, that is a really great question because that's something I had to get really clear about as someone who had seen that definition come to life and really, didn't identify with it. And I think that the thing that we're learning, and I'm just so grateful that in the past 5 years, there's so much more research and so much more open conversation about it because the anonymity factor that Alcoholics Anonymous kind of put a stronghold on that industry made it really difficult for people to even want to talk about it. So I'm so grateful for many of the conversations that are happening now that are allowing this to be more, just a little more approachable. And one of the things that we're learning is that there's this concept that one of my mentors is known for coining, Jolene Park, called gray area drinking. And that's when you drink in the normative range, but sometimes it's a little bit on the edge. So you're not drinking at the blackout every day. Alcohol is causing tremendous problems in my life, but you're also not drinking on the, oh, every once and now, once and again, I'll have a glass of champagne at a wedding or at a special occasion. It's this area right in the middle where sometimes it's a little lighter, but sometimes it bleeds into other areas of your life. And what I think is a really great question for anyone listening to ask is, have I started to use alcohol as an emotional or a social crutch to the point that I'm not certain how to cope with certain situations if I don't have alcohol in the picture? Have I started to associate alcohol with fun, that I can only have fun or be fun if alcohol is in the picture? And is it possible? Is there any part of me that wonders if my relationship with alcohol, as normal as it is, might be affecting my ability to reach my potential? And I don't just mean that in your professional life. I mean that in every area and aspect of your life. Is it keeping you from having the emotional depth and resilience that you desire to have? Is it keeping you from having the spiritual and personal growth that you desire? Is it keeping you from having the connected, reciprocal, intimate, vulnerable relationships and friendships that you desire? Is it at any level something that you're using as a band aid, a quick fix, or a crutch that's keeping you from the greatness that you're capable of? And if you're listening to this and thinking, oh, that feels kind of edgy, but I think maybe so, then this is a really great conversation because it can open up space for you to reconsider that relationship with alcohol outside of the conversation about addiction, which I think is really cool and special because it's just this new eye opening that we are all having as people who maybe drink or have interesting relationships with alcohol.
I do think it's a new space that you and many others have pioneered. This, I think Dry January kind of kicked it off. So let's talk a little bit about that because people think I did Dry January and I was fine. So I'm
Yeah.
not dependent on alcohol. So it's no big deal. I did it. I didn't miss it, but I kind of wanted to just go back to it. What do you say to those folks that didn't struggle yet go back to it?
I have so many gentle and tough love pieces because I get you. I was you. I was there. I totally went into Dry January with the intention of using it as a little reset, a little cleanse. And I also breezed through Dry January. I remember watching my friends fall off the wagon and thinking, you suckers, I'm going to knock this out of the park. Like it just gave me even more fuel to be resilient. And yet, if you are a capable, well person, you can probably do almost anything for 30 days. You can willpower your way through. So in January, that is probably about 10% of what you would experience being alcohol free. And that's just the white knuckling, willpowering through to abstain portion of the exercise. The other 90% of dealing with your relationship with alcohol is approaching situations where you otherwise would have drank. So the glass of wine to take the edge off at the end of the day, the glass of whatever to connect more deeply with your partner and relax, the cocktail on the weekend to celebrate a great week or to pat yourself on the back or to overcome some sort of struggle or stress that you have. If you haven't dealt with and figured out how to do those things without alcohol, then you haven't quite yet figured out the journey. And the other aspect of it is that 30 days really isn't enough to see the physical positive benefits of removing alcohol from your life. You might see a little bit of a glimmer of it, but you're really not going to start seeing the full benefits like better sleep, clearer skin, more energy, weight loss, kind of these more superficial things until you take a longer break. So I'm never going to shame anyone for doing a 30-day break. I think that's amazing. But if you're already at the end of that 30 days and you're thinking, yeah, it's time to bring alcohol back in, I would have you pause and do some reflective exercises to question, did I really learn a lesson or did I really gain anything from Dry January if I'm just using it as a way to go back to the habit at the end of the month? And I think that if people are willing to do that exercise, they'll probably find some really uncomfortable and confronting realities, but that it can be very beneficial as well.
Do you cover those exercises in your book?
I do. And so I really want people to look at alcohol in a way that, and sobriety and their drinking in a way that is gentle, but also probably questions that they've never been asked before. And when you think about it more on a psychological level and more on a mindset level, you start to realize, oh, wow, this thing, I've been using it to cheat a lot of things in my life, cheat at a lot of things. And if I'm being real with myself, I'm not sure if I have the skills to win at life without this thing in the picture. I know, and I want to tell you, you can develop those skills. It's very possible. They're simple skills. It will feel a little difficult to put them into place, but if you don't look at it and actually go beyond abstinence and go into that other 90% aspect of what you need to do to be emotionally and physically alcohol free, you've done yourself a big disservice. So I always encourage people to try and shoot for a 90-day goal, go for a 3-month stint, and then you'll really, really start to see some of the opportunities and the problems that alcohol has caused in your life.
I like that. A longer period than just 30 days.
Mhm.
What's the most important question to ask yourself? Like, what would be the most important question for someone to ask themselves around this relationship with alcohol?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is to rewrite the popular question, which is in AA, the first step is admitting that you're powerless over alcohol or admitting that you have a problem. And if that doesn't resonate with you, that's an ineffective question to ask. So, what if instead of saying, do I have a problem with alcohol? What if you ask, is alcohol creating problems in my life? And that doesn't mean that you're like doing the stereotypical skipping work or showing up missing obligations. That means, is it holding you back from your potential? So I would shift that to, is it possible that alcohol is keeping me from my truest potential, my happiness, my authenticity, my total expression of self? And most people would immediately answer, oh, no, 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 I'm doing great. Everything's okay. But if you are really an introspective and self reflecting person, I think that if you sat with that question, you'd be a little startled at some of the realities of the way in which alcohol is keeping you small and repressed. And I don't like to see that for anyone. I want everyone to live a big, bold, and healthy, healed, expressed life. And I know that for a lot of intelligent, capable people, alcohol is keeping them from that in a very subtle way that we would never examine because it is so socially acceptable.
It is. This is one of the questions I love to ask because it's so, and when I found this question, I was like, oh my gosh, because in college, I was like, let's whoop it up. I mean, it was,
Hmm.
and I got sick from alcohol. Like I'd hold it together the whole night, but the next day I was sicker than a dog. I was like,
Same here.
what is the problem here? Alcohol did not like me. It did not like
Hmm.
me at all, but I kept doing it. But this question really is so important. What age did you start drinking? And then do you feel like you're frozen in time at emotionally at that age when you drink? I mean,
Hmm.
I'm like,
Oh,
oh
yeah.
yeah, I was whooping it. I was
Yep.
so functioning so much younger than I really was because we
Hmm.
want that freedom feeling. We think it's
Hmm.
freedom. When someone comes to me, I know there's some arrested development
Hmm.
emotionally. Like we
Yes.
have stunted ourselves from the
Mhm.
age we started drinking. And then I can see it play out if you have a relationship. I can see it play out in that relationship. Like that person when they're defensive, and it's really the age that they started using, or there's a
Mhm.
trauma there. I don't want to just liken it to
Totally.
alcohol. I mean,
Absolutely.
there's many factors, but this is one to consider.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts around that?
Oh, absolutely. I always say that alcohol stunts our growth emotionally and in many other ways, and not just when we're drinking. I think it comes out most profoundly when we're drinking. But as you mentioned, you see people in relationships that they'll definitely pick fights with their partner when they're drinking. But the reality is that their emotional coping and communication skills outside of that, while maybe at work, when you're in a specific character, you can perform in a really high functioning way, but behind the scenes or in your inner world or in your more intimate relationships, you feel a little more chaotic and you are a little more immature. And let me tell you what, humbly, that was me. And I had to do a hard look at that because it was so uncomfortable. This person who outwardly I was very successful, I could pull it together in a professional environment because that was a character for me, right? And I knew how to perform that character. But when things got personal and things were a little more intimate and vulnerable, I realized, oh, she's not quite the adult that she thought that she was. And I had a romantic partner several years ago who he was several years older than me. And he and I were having this conversation. We were pretty new to dating. And he said something that was just so profound and also so kind. And for whatever reason, I had the emotional maturity to receive this comment. And he said, Amanda, I feel like when we're having conversations, I feel like your responses are calculated. And it punched me in the gut, but I thought, whoa, you're right. And I realized that when I was able to pull myself together, I was trying so hard to be what I thought the other person needed me to be. But then when shit hit the fan, I was a 17-year-old girl. And it was just so bizarre for me. I thought I was a woman at that point to realize that I didn't have some of the emotional coping skills that I needed. I was always outsourcing to people. I was always freaking out and gossiping or like bringing my drama to my friend groups. And when I stopped drinking and I realized I don't quite have the skills that I need to navigate life with the vulnerability and with I don't know, that just the regard, just the way that I wanted to, I really had to have this kind of like come to self moment where I had to rewind and start picking up some skills that I had never developed before. And that was so humbling and a little frustrating and a little scary. And I think that some people find it so terrifying that they just never do it. But wow, I can't tell you how empowered I feel now as a 37-year-old woman who has gone back and cleaned up the mess that I created for a couple decades. And it's so cool. And I wonder like how you see that with your clients or what you offer to them when they realize that, or you realize maybe that they're having this experience.
It changes their life. It's life changing because they realize I was functioning to your point, like my 17-year-old self, my 13-year-old self,
Hmm.
and they cut off parts of themselves with the alcohol. What were they escaping from? What part of themselves? Maybe it was something happened in the past. Maybe it's something they didn't like about themselves that they thought they
Hmm.
were more fun with when they did drink, or they were numbing the pain that they had, emotional pain, but they couldn't heal. They were literally like, to your point, when you were in therapy and you're like, I'm doing all the things. And then when they realized that sobriety was the answer to really changing their life, I have many clients that changed their whole family system. So they realized, oh, the holidays, we had a lot of alcohol flowing during holidays or celebrations or birthdays. And now we've taken that out of the picture and we actually have authentic, deep conversations because they're sober, but they're also doing the emotional work in tandem with the sobriety to bring them
Hmm.
up emotionally.
Yeah, that's the big part. And I can tell you, I mean, there's still certain times where I regress and around my family is one of the most obvious ones, but there are still times that I struggle with things. But the way in which I cope, I think is so profound. I had kind of a dramatic relationship issue come up over the past couple of weeks. And I had a couple of girlfriends specifically who I talked to about it. And one of them called me back and said, Amanda, I just have to tell you, this has come up for you before, as many things in relationships do. And I just have to give you a huge compliment with how like grounded and rational you were. And I am just so proud of you. And I thought, wow, thank you so much for sharing that with me because it was this huge transformation in this huge moment where I developed a skill or a way of perceiving or a way of reacting that felt so good in my nervous system, first of all, but that other people were noticing. That feels really good. And it's hard, but you can do it if you put your mind into it and you put the work into it and get the support that you need. And I think that that's probably, people have given me a lot of really kind compliments in my life, but I think that that's probably one of the most tremendous and profound because it's about how I show up in the world. And that's really special.
Yeah. And the fact that they said you're more grounded. See, that to
Hmm.
me, when someone says you're more grounded, that's what we all want to feel. We want to feel
Yeah.
more grounded and calm.
Yeah.
And I think when we're sober, like I remember this first time going into my friend group in college, that's what we did together. It
Hmm.
was like we drank, we had fun. We also were sober. I mean, at times, right? You're
Yeah.
not like drinking all the time. But when I went back later in life with the same friend group, I could feel my younger self online going, I'm not funny. I'm not
Hmm.
fun. I'm
Hmm.
boring, which is
Yeah.
like my shame story, right? I'm boring. And I had to sit with a lot of feelings that came up. And that was an invitation for more growth for me to sit with those
Hmm.
feelings and feel like I don't have to be the funny one. I don't have to be fun all the time and witty. I can be okay just sitting here observing, and
Hmm.
I don't have to be a part of it. But I had to do a lot of nurturing of my inner therapy talk, but
Hmm.
inner
Yeah.
child stuff. I
Yeah.
feel like my teen self, like I'm left out. I'm
Hmm.
not part of the cool clique. I'm not clique, but you know what I'm saying? It was a lot of work at that point. And I think that's what scares people from doing this.
Hmm.
Like
It
that they're
is.
going to
It is a
feel
lot of
those
work.
old feelings and they don't want to
Hmm.
feel those old feelings. But it's also sometimes necessary.
Yeah, but do you wanna also carry around those old feelings in your emotional backpack your entire life and have that story dangling over your head every single waking moment? No, that sucks. Like, no one deserves that, and if you actually deal with it and sit with it, yeah, you're gonna experience some temporary discomfort, but it's going to be so much better and so much less heavy for the rest of your life, and that's the real win, I think.
And to realize those friends that are accept you are going to drop off, but the ones that are, they're going to go, I love you for who you
Yes.
are. I love that you're
Totally.
deep. I love that you like to have deep talks. I love
Mhm.
that you're going to bring that to the table. And when
Mhm.
you can embrace it, you don't need the validation so much from everybody else. That's the beauty of the work.
Mhm.
That's just icing on the cake, but you can feel more secure in who you are. But alcohol gives you a temporary, sometimes for
Mhm.
people, it feels like, oh, I got confidence to go out in the social
Mhm.
situation. What do you
Yeah.
say about that?
That real confidence is not something you have to do anything for. It's something that you gain because you've proven to yourself that you can do it. And liquid courage is fake courage. And if you're using alcohol as a way to gain the confidence to do something, you're actually not getting more confident, or at some point, you'd be able to do it without alcohol. Right? It's like bowling with, if you've ever taken a kid bowling, they put the little bumpers in there so the ball can't go in the gutter. You could bowl with the bumpers your entire life and convince yourself that you're one kick-ass bowler, but then you take those bumpers out, you're going to be in the gutter, my friend. And so if you've convinced yourself that the socializing that you're doing, that alcohol is giving you confidence, know that you're actually cheating your way there. And true confidence comes from showing up and playing the game and playing it full out without cheating. And let me tell you what, it's a muscle you have to flex. You have to get out there and do it and put yourself in some situations where maybe you roll the ball in the gutter every single time. That's probably not going to happen, by the way. You're probably going to be more capable and successful than you think. You're really just probably going to worst case scenario, but you've got to try and fail. And that is what builds confidence, is learning how to do it for yourself, not always cheating your way through. And I think that's the thing that most people don't realize about alcohol, is it's just cheating, or else at some point you'd just be good at it.
What do we need in order, like for people listening that are like, I'm toying with
Mhm.
this. I'm not sure I'm quite ready. What's the first step?
The first step is just to be curious. I think that one of the pieces of my journey that I often forget, because I wasn't aware I was going through it, so I didn't clearly document it. But when I see it with clients, it's so much easier to see these pieces falling together, is being curious and going out and doing investigations and starting to open yourself up to different people and possibilities of living an alcohol-free lifestyle that don't fit the stereotypes, that don't resonate with you. So I would say that if you are feeling curious, if you're feeling drawn to this, one of the most powerful things you can do is go out and find people who have gone before you, who you resonate with, who can show you what's possible. And let me tell you what, that person didn't really exist for me. So that's why I do the work that I do, is because I wanted to be, what I call it in the spiritual world, is an expander, someone who expands you into the reality, the possibility that if she can do it, I can do it too, because we are similar. Our stories match up. I resonate with that. Whereas most of the stories that were available for me were like desperate addiction, alcoholism, rock bottom. And I'm like, well, shouldn't go down that path, because I don't know, resonate with that person. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I think that every path is really important. But I think that for so many people, we need to see someone who's like-minded, like lifestyle, and who has already done the thing and checked the box, so that we have the confidence that it's possible for us. And I think if you just start there by like snooping around on Instagram or social media, or through other podcasts, or reading some books that are in the quit literature genre, that you can start to feel like, oh, yeah, I get this and I could do it too. And then that will guide you to the next step, which is actually taking action. So just kind of get curious and research a little bit so that you can see it as a possibility that might apply to you, is really helpful.
And then let's say someone says, okay, I'm going to take that step.
Mhm.
I'm going to join your group, get your book, or whatever else resources are out there. What does someone need to help them stay the course of sobriety?
There's no right or wrong way, but I think that some of the things that help are having a mentor or a community to keep you accountable and to help you feel less alone, and to help you navigate some of the stumbling blocks that are bound to come up. I think that having someone to help you navigate the gaining of the new emotional and social skills that you need is really important, because, again, only 10% of it is giving up the alcohol itself, stopping drinking. And the other part is, how do I build up my toolkit with emotional and spiritual and otherwise tools to help me navigate life, so that I feel more confident in my ability to do so? And then also someone to hold you accountable to start filling that space that alcohol left behind with things that are your actual desires, helping you to start building a life that doesn't revolve around alcohol, so that you have no desire to bring it back in. And if you can find a way to, a person to, a path to get those three components, I think that you will have a recipe for pretty quick success, certainly much faster than it took for me, or much faster than I achieved it. And that's what I really intend to provide for people, is how can you have like a packaging of some really powerful steps that are going to help you navigate life alcohol free. And if you have those things in place, wow, you can just skyrocket ahead really quickly.
Okay, let's say those. I'm just going to throw things out there that
Oh
I
yeah,
know I've
I
heard
love.
clients say, we're
Uh-huh.
just going to popcorn these. I need it to sleep. Like I can't sleep without it.
Okay, the data shows, I mean, real data. I wear a wearable, which is a Aura ring, but there's also a really popular one called Whoop. all of the data shows that the sleep you get when you're drinking is terrible sleep. It is not quality. You're basically passing out. You're not going to sleep. So it's completely debunked. It's medically not true. And as someone who's struggled with sleep anxiety my entire life, I absolutely resonate with that. But there are other paths to actually getting good sleep that will help you. Alcohol is not it. And you're fooling yourself. You're getting half-ass quality sleep if you're using alcohol as a sleep aid.
Scientifically proven.
Yep.
Scientifically proven. Okay. Number two that I hear is I am so stressed out and overwhelmed. Like I can barely cope with all the stress and overwhelm in my life. I just want a glass of wine or two at night to take the
Mhm.
edge off.
Oh, first of all, I love you and I feel you. And I know that you are capable of dealing with stress on your own. You've just never been given the tools. And the problem with using wine as a coping mechanism or as a mechanism to dull the edges is it doesn't make the stress go away. It just pauses it for a minute. And that stress boomerangs back the next morning when you are all the less capable to deal with it because you're starting your day at half capacity or quarter capacity or whatever it is, because you're slightly hungover, you're slightly frazzled, your body and your mind aren't working at full capacity. You're actually doing yourself a huge disservice because wine doesn't make your problems go away. It just pauses them for a second and then brings them back with boomerang effect the next day.
Number three, wine is good for us. Doctors have said 1 glass of wine a day is good for us.
Oh my goodness. This one I love because, oh geez, it's just not true. And this is the one where I'll be a little snarky, but here's the thing. Antioxidants in wine are good for you, but those antioxidants are coupled with ethanol, which is lighter fluid. Basically, it's a poison. It's a carcinogen. It's a neurotoxin. And you would be much more benefit to go get those antioxidants from a couple of handfuls of blueberries than you are drinking it in combination with a toxic fluid. And alcohol fundamentally changes the way all of your vital organs operate. And it's indiscriminate as to how it affects your body. So it's really wreaking havoc on your body. If you want a really, really great explanation of this from a neuroscientist, Dr. Andrew Huberman did an amazing episode in August 2022 of his podcast called How Alcohol Affects Your Body, Brain, and Health. And he like really dives into the studies. And so I could reiterate them, but go get it from the source. I mean, your eyes will be opened if you listen to that podcast episode.
Yeah. I mean, it ages you significantly. I mean,
Oh,
it ages your
absolutely.
brain, and we
Mhm.
have so much data on that. Okay. Number four, this is how me and my partner kind of met each other. I mean, we met at a
Mm,
bar, and that's our thing. Like
yeah.
we like to go to dinner and have our wine and have our drinks. And what if I give it up? What will happen to my marriage or my relationship?
That's a toughie because that is a really huge fear of someone who's used alcohol as a mechanism to connect with their partner. And I want to say this in two different ways because I think that there's two different ways that this fear manifests. And one is, how will we connect? We've always done this. Will it disconnect us? But the reality is that if you love your partner and your partner loves you, true connection is not built on a liquid bond. That is not the thing that's bringing you together. That's something you happen to do together. But if you two are truly compatible, you truly love each other, that is just a habit that you have together. Things are not going to change as long as you continue to put effort into the relationship. Now, I do see some relationships where I work primarily with women. So the wife will stop drinking and then they'll stop having this connection time that they had, like sitting out on the back patio. She'll use that to go like sit in her office or sit in her lounge area. So you miss this time that you were spending together. So there's definitely some things you want to consider when optimizing around that. If wine was something you did during your connection time. Now, the other end of the spectrum is maybe you're in an unhappy marriage and you haven't been ready to face it. And so you drink every night to numb out a little bit and disconnect yourself, or maybe to tolerate some of the suboptimal patterns in your relationship. And the reality is that when you stop drinking, you might wake up to the fact that this shit just isn't working anymore. And it might be time to face some harsh realities. And I think that that is so difficult and so brave to do because it might mean an even bigger upheaval and life change comes to the forefront. And that's scary. But wouldn't you rather figure that out and have you and your partner go on your separate ways and live a life that's truly happy than to be living this life where you have to self medicate every single night to deal with a relationship that's not working? Or maybe even have the possibility of maybe you do figure out a way to make the relationship work because you stop making yourself numb to it. I think that for me, it's all about you deserve to be happy. And this thing is actually something you're using to bypass happiness and bypass connection or bypass pain and discomfort. And I would want for anyone to show up in their relationship and actually just be fulfilled and connected. And if that's not what's probably happening when you're drinking alcohol.
Yeah. And the reality is, if you get sober and your husband, wife, partner, whatever
Mhm.
doesn't, and that bothers you, you got to
Yeah.
either go to marital counseling, but you can't change the other person. You can request that they stop drinking, but that doesn't mean that they will. So
Mhm.
you can't control that. So you might have some things to rumble through.
Absolutely.
And that feels scary to people. They're like, I don't want to lose my, and I'm like, well, we don't know that. Or you're afraid of it, but we don't know that's
Mhm.
actually true. Now, that is a possibility. I'm not saying that. And it's still a
Totally.
possibility if you keep drinking.
Absolutely, because at some point it's going to hit the fan, for lack of a better
It
word.
always does.
Right? Always does. And so you get to decide, do you want to be in your right mind and have somewhat control of the situation and your wits about you and be able to navigate it that way? And I'll tell you, and you probably have like a similar, this is just an off the cuff statistic. The percentage of people who find that their marriage in my work, it needs to dissolve, very small percentage. The percentage of people who I work with whose partner is troublesome after they quit drinking alcohol, also very small percentage. It's very rare that that is what happens. The more delightful thing that I want to turn you on to, not that this is absolutely what's going to happen, but when you go first with no expectation of your partner making any sort of changes, you just start to show up and be a more happy, grounded, rooted, centered, fulfilled version of you. A lot of times, what I see is that without any nudging, without any nagging or anything like that, the partner starts to come along for the journey. And maybe they don't quit drinking altogether, but they cut back a little bit. And it starts to become less and less of a feature of their lives. And I think that that's really cool that you could just maybe impact someone just by showing up and being different and holding the energy of your relationship different. And so I want to just preface that those other two extremes are very, very rare. And if they happen, you can get through it. The more likely thing is that your relationship will transform for the better. I wonder if you see similar like outcomes in your practice.
Yes. I think it depends on the situation and how
Hmm.
severe the drinking was.
Totally. Yep.
To your point, like it depends
Hmm.
on like were they doing like how extensive was it? And then did that lead to other substance use?
Hmm. Hmm.
Gummies, marijuana. I mean, we were
Yep.
how numbed out were we in the relationship? And
Hmm.
how much a part of the relationship was it? So it depends, I think. Yes. And
Yeah.
I think to your point, if you're focused on your own growth and you're doing some deeper healing work, so you're in therapy, you're with a coach, you're with a group, you're working on some of the deeper things, I feel like that is the liberation that people want when they drink. Like that's the liberation right there. Like you're going to
Hmm.
get even more authentic, deep, sustainable liberation that you're craving than using alcohol. So this leads me to kind of I like family systems work.
Hmm.
So my next one is I give my kid a drink because I'd rather have them drink with me than
Mm.
in my care than someone else's.
Oh, that is a tough one. I don't actually even know if I've ever had to answer this question and from my clients. So I do want to hear your perspective on this, but just off the cuff, I think that alcohol is a rite of passage. And I'm not here to to like do away with alcohol or to say that you should try to convince your kids not to ever drink, because I think that so much of an important part of my journey was that I did use alcohol. I think that it did probably help me learn some things about myself that I never might have learned if I would have just stayed very straight laced. And it also created some problems. But I also think that, Kristen, for me, that I don't know that I would be the person that I am today if I wouldn't have driven myself down a path that caused me to reconsider who I was and what I wanted in my life. I think that my life might have taken a different trajectory. So sometimes I think that we need those self-generated, self-created struggles in order to help us reshape into the person that we're intended to become. And so, yeah, I had some pretty tumultuous experiences with alcohol. And even though I didn't, quote, have a problem, it could have certainly gotten to that point if I would have kept going. And at the end of the day, though, I have to look back at that period of my life and say, I'm glad that that happened, because I'm certain that it is, well, I know, I mean, it's my life's work now. So I know that it caused me to get to where I am today. And I think that kind of on the same page as the abstinence conversation with sex, if we only teach children and young adolescents to just not have sex, then we're leaving out a whole important part of the conversation with a lot of important facts that are really going to come back to get them in the future. So I think that it really depends upon how you approach the conversation and if you are giving them education or you're just giving them a location to drink. There's two different aspects there. So if you're able to have some open conversations with them, I think that for most adolescents, it's probably inevitable that at some point they're going to try and experiment with alcohol. So yeah, maybe it is safer to do it under the watch of your own home, but also it's really important to have those conversations so that they have a platform for making these decisions mindfully or as mindfully as possible at that point in their lives.
Yeah,
What do you what do
it's a
you
tough
think?
conversation. Well, we statistically know that the statistics prove otherwise. Like
Mhm.
that actually is I can't remember the statistics, but almost double increases the likelihood of your kid to be an addict, which was
Oh, because
shocking
you're
to me
yeah.
when I found out.
Uh-huh. I can see
So,
that though, because it's like you're saying, "Hey, this is okay." You're giving them a permission slip. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so it actually is the opposite research
Mm,
wise. So I thought that
okay.
was very interesting. And then the second component that I find fascinating is we've had in with my kids, I've got two teen daughters.
Mhm.
And one I could tell very early had like an addictive brain. She would watch
Uh-huh.
like a show and her brain would like, it was Dora the Explorer. I mean, come on.
Uh-huh.
And she'd
Yeah.
be like, just more aggressive. And I was like, what is happening? What is
Yeah.
happening?
What
So
did
we
Dora
did
do to make you
what's
so
called like a brain map. It's called brain
Uh-huh.
mapping. I don't know if you've heard of it, where you
Mhm.
take like
Mhm.
electrodes. It's pretty mindless. You put a cap
Yeah.
on and they
Yep.
look at your brain waves. Well, come to find out, it showed she had an addictive brain. So at a very second grade, we started
Mhm.
having conversation about addiction and
Mhm.
how if she took a sip of alcohol, the likelihood statistically of her getting had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol would be exponentially higher.
Mhm.
And so we've
Mhm.
talked about it ever since. And
Yeah.
whether she will or won't, because she's leaving for college next year, I have no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
And she knows her risk level and
Mhm.
what can happen. And that's all I
Yes.
can do, right?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
It's up to her. She's been educated about alcohol. She's been educated about the brain and the body. We don't drink at home. So it's
Mhm.
like she has all the variables, but that doesn't mean that I don't
Well,
know what the future
so
holds,
did we,
right?
because guess
I
what?
mean,
Like, we all went through DARE. We know, we saw, like,
exactly.
the
Your brain on
cirrhosis.
drugs.
Yes, we all saw that,
I
and we
actually
still
showed the video
choose.
to my kids. I was like, "This is your brain, and this is your brain on drugs with the egg in the pan." I don't know if you ever remember that
Yeah,
commercial,
oh,
but
I remember it, but we all think we're so invincible at that
I
age, and
know.
so, yeah, now that I'm thinking back, I'm thinking of the parents and no judgment because I'm sure everyone is just
Absolutely
doing the
none.
best, but I'm thinking about the kids from my high school years whose parents allowed them to drink at home or allowed them to throw parties, and I don't think any of them ended up on a straight and narrow path for a while. I think that they all had, like, some pretty tremendous struggles, and so, yeah, I can absolutely and also is pretty prevalent in their house, so it was just a mindset that they developed into that this is what we do, this is our people, this is how we react. And so when you look at it from all of those factors, and I can see all of the underlying things as well, I can absolutely see where allowing it, and also then you are making that decision quite often for other parents, because I can't tell you how many times it's like, okay, well, then we let Susie and Sally and Stacy all come over and drink too, even though they're like, but if we sure didn't call their parents and say, hey, we're going to give your kids alcohol, it's just a very slippery slope. So I can see where that would be very problematic. And yet, I also think it's important to not like shame your kids that alcohol is like bad, wrong, or evil. It's really important to have conversations so they know different stances and possibilities so that they're not under the impression that alcoholism is the only reason that you quit drinking or that you're a square and you're a loser if you quit drinking, because those are some of the things that I had taken on. And I don't know if having more knowledge would have been helpful for me, but it's hard to tell. You can't know looking back.
It is. It's such an interesting conversation, and that's exactly why I wanted you on to have a conversation. Have a conversation with other people. Like, how hard is
Hmm.
this? Where did it begin for you? What fears do you have about giving it up? Supporting each other in a conversation. And someone may not be ready. That's not the point. The point is,
Yeah.
let's have a more open dialogue about it
Hmm.
and the fears around not doing it. Because I
Yes.
think if we could, like you're doing, trailblazing a conversation, that's where to me it's like, that's liberation. Like we can start
Hmm.
just talking about it openly and not shame anybody. We're holding tender, loving, compassionate space for it. So we can come forward with like, how did this even start for myself? Like, why is this even an issue for myself? How did I bring this into my relationships? How did I bring this into our family system? Oh, this goes generations back. It's just so liberating.
It
So,
is.
okay,
Yeah.
I could talk to you for hours. Where can people find your book? And is there anything else that you wanted to share that we didn't get to?
I just want to give everyone some just hope and possibility that if this conversation resonated with you, that there's a reason why. There's a reason why. And that doesn't mean you have to take any sort of action right now. But if you're called to and drawn to this conversation, it's so important that you do the due diligence of investigating it and letting yourself explore that curiosity, because that means to me, typically, that you are on the brink of just incredible emotional and spiritual expansion, and that going to the next level, this could take you to the next level, this idea of removing alcohol from your life. And so if you want more on that conversation, I'm always on Instagram at Amanda Kuda. I'm also on TikTok every now and then. Same, it's Amanda.Kuda on TikTok, but you can find me anywhere on the internet by looking at my name, Amanda Kuda, and my book, Unbottled Potential, which is an expansive, positive, optimistic approach to taking a break from and having a break up with alcohol, is available on Amazon or any other bookstore. And if you have Spotify Premium, you can listen to the audio version of the book as part of your membership. So I think that's pretty special. If you're an audiobook gal like me, I narrate it, and it was one of the most special experiences of my life. I think you'd really like it.
I think you'd love it. And I love the title of the book. I know titling a book is so important, but I think that's when you unbottle, you step into your potential.
Yes.
I mean, that is perfect title for your book. And I love it so, so much. And thank you, Amanda, for the work you're doing in the world. Thank you for this authentic, vulnerable, real conversation. Go check out all of the programs Amanda offers, her book. Check her out on Instagram and TikTok. And thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week, and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, D, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks, and have a great day.